Welcome to Grandview Cemetery. It's the 19th annual cemetery stroll, and as Pat said, my name is Mike Calhoun, and I'm supervisor here at the cemetery, and I want to thank you all for attending the longest running living history event in Fort Collins. Every year, the Cemetery Stroll Committee, which a lot of these people belong to, pay tribute to the local residents who helped shape our community. This year's no different, for in the shadow of the Civil War, a fort was born. So as part of the sesquicentennial of the war between the states, we recall the people who, after the battles, helped to build Fort Collins and made it their home. Today, we highlight the lives of 7 men who served on both sides of our nation's divide, who put their differences aside and established this place we call Fort Collins. Grandview Cemetery, which is the city's 3rd cemetery, was established in 1887. There have been over 25,000 interments to date. In the original layout, there included a section specially designated for soldiers. As you move through the tour, you will pass by the section S, also known as the soldier section. There are over 4,000 soldiers from all branches of the service laid to rest in Grandview and Roselawn cemeteries. Although today's presentations focus on the lives of 7 local individuals, there are many others buried at Grandview Cemetery whose stories we are not able to tell. So at the conclusion of the event, I invite you to continue your stroll through the grounds, view the memorials to other veterans and our city forefathers, and experience Grandview as a place where history comes alive. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce someone you all should know, Lieutenant Colonel William Oliver Collins of the 11th Ohio Voluntary Cavalry.
Thank you, Corky. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Bill Collins from Hillsboro, Ohio, an attorney and retired colonel with the Grand Army of the Republic. My story begins for you so that I don't run out of time here. In April of 1861, Fort Sumter. I was 51 years old, practicing law in Hillsboro, and I answered the call. I resigned from my position as a state senator, and I began a course of recruitment for volunteers to join with my brother, President Lincoln. He and I share the same birth year along with Charles Darwin and others. The only difference between Charles and Abraham and me is that they were born on the same day. I began a year-long recruitment effort of fellow Buckeyes. We thought we were going to be sent across the Ohio River to Kentucky. They boarded our regiment on paddle boats. Now, can you imagine 1,000 men and horses and supplies on paddle boats? And took us down to St. Louis, Missouri. I thought I'd be joining up with Ulysses. Lo and behold, we got orders to go to Fort Leavenworth in the middle of Kansas Territory. And soon there were orders for us to travel 690 miles to Dakota Territory, Fort Laramie. They called it the Nebraska Division that I was put in command of. That was Julesburg, west along the along the South Platte watershed on the south, following the Oregon Trail, and to the north, the North Platte watershed, from Fort Laramie all the way to South Pass. Those were the sites of immigrant trails. The south, from Julesburg, the Overland Trail, which veered up here into LaPorte, Colorado. The north, over South Pass in Wyoming, the lowest point in the Continental Divide for people to get across in those days. That was our mission, to protect travelers and the mail. 690 miles from Fort Leavenworth, we marched, or rode our horses in the cavalry, 20 miles, 25 miles on a good day, We made it in a little over a month to Fort Laramie. I wasn't a sitting behind the desk commander. I was out with the troops all the time, scouting and patrolling. LaPorte, Colorado was a tiny settlement established in the early 1850s, long before I came out here, with a small camp that evolved into Camp Collins. That was part of my responsibility too. In May of 1864 was one of the most ignoble months in United States history. Think about the wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, all those battles going on across the other side of the Mississippi from where I was. Those and other minor engagements, over 80,000 Americans died in that month. In June of 1864, I think God wanted to cleanse the land. He sent a flood of water down the Cache La Poudre. It washed out our army camp and all the settlers there. We knew we had to relocate our camp, so we surveyed about 5-6 miles west of LaPorte to higher ground south of the Cache La Poudre, and the War Department established a 6,000-acre military reservation. In all that acreage, we occupied the very northwest corner when we set up Fort Collins. No stockade fence, couple of big barracks, stables, a commissary, quartermaster, hospital, 2 cabins for officers, and a guardhouse for malcreants. Things were peaceful down in the South Platte watershed, and duty for my men was a little boring and tedious on patrol because the skirmishes were few with the natives, were few and far apart. I had to provide some kind of entertainment besides liquor, which was not a good thing for troops, and which my wife frowned upon her entire life. I'll tell you maybe later. So we created games. We carried on America's invention of baseball out here. We played a form of polo that we learned from the natives with our horses. And we even played a version of rugby where we hauled around a boulder against each other. We also had some slapstick theater to entertain ourselves. I was an outdoorsman and pretty spry for being 52 years old in the 1860s, so that was a natural thing for me. Being out with the troops also gave me an opportunity to make weather recordings for the Smithsonian Institute. I'm astounded at how times have changed. My town today is only about 6,500 people, Hillsboro, close to Cincinnati. I'd have never thought someone would have had to swear on a Bible to tell me what this place looks like today. 150,000 people and trees. I take it you've been good stewards, and I thank you very much.
I'm John Mandeville, and this is my wife of 50-plus years, Clara. Isn't she beautiful and young-looking?
Oh, John!
We decided that I would tell you a bit about my Civil War service, being assigned to Camp Collins, and at the point where Clara joined me, for her to tell you about our wedding, coming to the area, and what a plague of locusts had to do with our next moves. I initially enlisted in the New York Engineer Regiment in 1861 with the rank of corporal. Due to a disability, I was mustered out in 1862. In 1863, I enlisted in the New York Volunteer Cavalry, in which I served as a lieutenant until mustered out and discharged at Denver, Colorado Territory in 1866. During the Civil War, I served under Generals Hunter, Sigel, and Sheridan and participated in 13 battles in Virginia. I joined General Sheridan chasing General Early up and down the Shenandoah Valley. We arrived in Fort Collins in 1865 at a time when Arapaho Chief Friday and his people were camped on the Sherwood place. I and a detachment of troopers were sent to Fort Morgan to assure that freight haulers and emigrants didn't pass to and fro without adequate protection. In 1865, a battalion of the 21st accompanied Territorial Governor John Evans, who took 13 wagons of gifts, including one wagon of Navy tobacco whose plugs were a foot in length, to a peace parley with the Utes under Chiefs Ouray and Colero. Before the talk, Governor Evans asked me to bring him some pine boards for him to whittle during the talks. He turned several boards into nice kindling shaving. A treaty of peace was signed, and during the celebration, the Indians jokingly surrounded us. But even though the intentions were good, we were startled, but they all laughed at their joke. We then returned to Fort Collins, where we were mostly charged with protecting the overland stage route of Jack Slade and the LaPorte and Virginia Dale stations. We were mustered out and discharged at Denver in 1866 and replaced by a Missouri regiment that served until the fort was abandoned in 1867. Clara, would you pick up there and tell them the time and circumstances of our wedding, coming to Fort Collins, and life here until the plague of locusts?
First, I think you need to know something John won't tell you, is that his great-grandfather was a general under George Washington. We were married in New York State in 1861, and 2 days later he left for the war. I saw him only occasionally for the next 5 years, but this is common during any time of war. In 1866, by train and by covered wagon, we came to Fort Collins, and as we neared the eastern plains close to Fort Collins, we were met by Chief Friday and his Arapahoes, and we arrived in time to have dinner with Auntie Elizabeth Stone in her cabin. Late in the summer of 1867, and several times for the next 4 years, a black cloud of grasshoppers came and ate everything in sight. I tried to save my tomatoes by putting army blankets over them, but the locusts ate those as well. So John, a skilled carpenter and contractor, accepted a job offer in Cheyenne to build a hotel, and he built a house for us there as well and moved me to it 2 days before our first baby was born. So I gave birth to her in the nearly completed house using army blankets as walls. She was the first white child born in Cheyenne. Cheyenne was a hard place to live. So in 1869 we returned to LaPorte, to our peaceful, wonderful farm on the east side of North Taft Hill Road, just north of the river. Totally different place than Cheyenne. I'll let John tell you of his work, because in 1873 the next plague of locusts came, and we didn't want to rely solely on farming.
Thanks, Clara. Although we were married in a Methodist Episcopal church, we fellowshipped at Fort Collins First Presbyterian Church after initially attending church and Saturday night dances at the old Grout building.
Woohoo!
Shortly after returning to LaPorte, Chief Colero offered to buy Clara and the baby. He offered 2, 4, then 6 ponies, a great amount in the Indian currency. When I assertively declined, he said, "White man, heap damn fool."
Language!
After about 20 years in LaPorte, we moved to Fort Collins, where we moved into a house at 430 Peterson Street, where I had a business with partner Holly, building and repairing carriages. I also served as a justice of the peace, was active in the community, and served as a commander in the fraternal Grand Army of the Republic. Clara, why don't you tell them about our son Dwight, your thoughts on Cheyenne, and your friend Mrs. Harry Stratton?
Our son Dwight was born in LaPorte, and we lost a daughter who lived only a few days after her birth. Her name was Hattie, and she lies there. Both our son and our daughter Grace married well and were good solid contributors in Fort Collins for many years, of which we are very proud. We moved from Cheyenne because Cheyenne Indians stole anything possible, unlike Chief Friday and his Arapahoes here in Fort Collins. Cheyenne was violent, and while living there, I saw gunfights, lynchings, and several times the Vigilante Committee searched our home for criminals that had been seen escaping in the direction of our home, in case they were hiding in our house. Did you hide any? Well,
No, not to my recollection.
the Indians would peer in our windows occasionally, both in Cheyenne and in LaPorte. And one time I chased one off with a shotgun to show him that this was the wrong house to peer into. I'm feeling a little bit lightheaded at the moment.
Tell them about your friend Mrs. Harry Stratton.
Whenever I would get to feeling lightheaded, it was mean I was overworking, and I would go and visit her, and things would be all right again. What would a woman do without her friends? She was my first and lifelong friend, and she was the first white woman married in Fort Collins. We celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary and reception at the home of our daughter, on her lovely home on Matthews Street. And our home on 430 Peterson Street, as John has mentioned, still stands and is owned today by Bill Birchie. I used to make my bread from hops that grew alongside the Poudre River, my bread yeast from hops. I want to tell you one more thing of great importance to me. When John was Justice of the Peace, he presided over a hearing one time for 2 arrested for stealing livestock, and there was great interest shown by the stockmen of the community in this hearing, and high attendance at the hearing, because no one could tolerate any cattle rustling or livestock rustling at all, or no one could afford to live here if it happened in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
Welcome. My name is William Lindenmeier Sr. In 1839, I was born in what you might call Germany, but in 1839 it wasn't Germany. It was the Kingdom of Württemberg, which was one of the 39 states that made up the German Confederation. In 1871, the German Confederation would go on to merge with Prussia and become the German Empire under Wilhelm I, Kaiser of Germany. Later on, that became the state and nation of Germany, but that's a different story. And I'm basically from the southern part of that area, near the borders of France and Switzerland. In 1852, my parents moved to this country. I was either 12 or 13, and my father had decided that, having had a good German education, what I really needed was a trade. So he trained me in saddle making as a young man to have something to do when I was in this new country. So in terms of having the ability to work leather and make saddles, it was a very handy thing to have, although it wasn't quite as lucrative as I might have liked. So in 1860, at the age of 21, I set out to find gold at Pikes Peak during the gold rush. That didn't turn out so well, so I had to look for something else. And in 1861, the new territory of Colorado was forming an infantry unit because the Civil War had just started, and the government of Colorado decided that they needed an army to protect the residents of the territory of Colorado from the Indians and from the Confederates. So the 1st Regiment of Colorado Volunteers was formed, and in March of 1862, I participated in the battles of Glorieta Pass, and Peralta, which is in what now is New Mexico. This was the Union Army's incursion into the southern parts of what is now our country to keep the Confederates from making a stand there. General Henry Hopkins Sibley, a Confederate general, and his men were trying to establish a stronghold in what is now Arizona so that they could have a place from which to harass the Union and hopefully win their side of the war. Well, General Sibley was chased back to Santa Fe and ultimately to Texas by the Union forces, and the units I was with was actually what kept the Confederates from establishing a stronghold in the Southwest. In November of 1862, the territorial governor, John Evans, combined the 1st Infantry Regiment with Company C and D of the 2nd Infantry Regiment and formed the Colorado 1st Cavalry Regiment, the thinking being that you can cross Colorado faster on horseback than you can on foot. He's right. He appointed Colonel John Shivington as the commander of the regiment. Colonel Shivington was a Methodist preacher who was credited as being instrumental at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, and he was given command based on his previous successes. Colonel Shivington sadly wanted to make a name for himself as an Indian fighter and went on to do so, and it was not a particularly good name. I was serving in that regiment. I was in Company B under Captain William F. Wilder. I entered the service at the rank of private and maintained it throughout until my discharge in 1865 when the Army was disbanding all the units that they had put together for the Civil War. At the war's conclusion, I was honorably discharged at Fort Russell in Cheyenne, and the rest of the unit was mustered out in Leavenworth, Kansas. Not too long after that, I met and married Catherine Huber in Denver City, which is what Denver used to be called. And Catherine was also an immigrant from Germany in the area that I came from. We married, and our first child was named William Jr., after myself. And he was incidentally only the second white child to be born in Denver City, if you care about such things. In 1874, we moved from Denver to Cheyenne so that I could raise cattle. And while in Cheyenne, I joined the Masonic Lodge there and became a life member. A few years after that, I moved to Fort Collins and settled down for good. Now, in 1884, I purchased a quarter section of land on the Soapstone Prairie with the intentions of running more cattle. I was a member of the Larimer County Stock Growers Association, which manages roundup and dealt with rustlers. My property on the Soapstone Prairie would ultimately become widely known as a source of delight from archaeologists from back east. But that's another different story. In 1902, my lovely wife Catherine passed away at the age of 68, and after her passing, I continued to busy myself with business ventures in livestock and real estate. In 1911, my son, William Jr., took over running the Soapstone Ranch and purchased another 3 sections running up to 3,000 head of cattle at a time. The remains of my stone ranch house are still up there on the prairie. In the 1920s, I owned a saloon in Fort Collins called the Bill of Trade. It was at 157 North College. If a customer were unruly or drank too much, we would lock him in the back room until such time as he would sober up. This was good for 2 reasons. First, it was a public service, and it was also very good for business because selling alcohol was illegal in Fort Collins in those days. I also managed a billiard hall. I believe it was over on Remington Street. But in 1928, I had been sick for about a year. I was not doing well. I died at the age of 89. And if I had to do it all over again, I would do most of it over again. I would do some things differently. I'm proud of most of my accomplishments, and I'm certainly proud of my family and their legacy.
Good morning, ladies and gents, boys and girls. Nice to see you this morning. My name is Henderson Calvin Howard, and the Howards are Scottish people, so I'm pretty proud of my Scots. I heard through the soil the other day they had an election. They didn't rebel against England, and I don't like rebellions, so I just as well. But I'm pretty proud of being part of the Campbell clan. So anyway, I was born in 1839 in a little town in Pennsylvania called Indiana, Pennsylvania. Don't think that's Pennsylvania, Indiana. It's Indiana, Pennsylvania. And it's 55 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. So I was born there, and my name was Calvin Henderson Howard, Henderson being my mother's maiden name. And I was an apprentice carpenter. And I worked till I was almost 20, and I got drafted into the damn Civil War. And I was with the 11th Infantry of Pennsylvania, called the Bloody 11th because of all the battles that it fought. Company B, and I was drafted as a corporal. So at age 21, we go marching off to war, and we become part of the Army of the Potomac. Went all the way down to Virginia.
They changed your name.
And oh yeah, the Army got me all screwed up. They changed my middle name from my first name, so I became Henderson Calvin rather than Calvin Henderson. So that's okay. I like HC. Everybody calls me HC, except her. What do you call me?
The Colonel.
The Colonel. I only made first sergeant, but she calls me the Colonel. Anyway, the first battle was just 3 months after I was in the Army. It was the Great Battle of Glendale in Virginia. I bayoneted 4 guys coming at my company, and I got bayoneted once and shot twice. And I laid on the battlefield for 3 days and 2 nights with the bodies. They thought I was dead. After 3 days and 2 nights, as they're picking up the bodies, they found me alive.
Praise the Lord.
And so I was healed. They patched me all up, and I fought in the Second Battle of Bull Run in Virginia. Towards a year later, we were marching all over Virginia, and we had to march up to Pennsylvania, and we fought in the Battle of Gettysburg from July 1st to July 4th, 1863. So in 1864, as they promised, they let me loose. They let me out of the Army after 3 years of service, and they gave me some little pieces of silver, and they said, we're going to be sending you a medal someday. It took them 28 years to send this Medal of Honor, but I'm the only Medal of Honor winner in this entire cemetery.
The only one.
Right here, the Congressional Medal of Honor. I'm pretty proud of this, more important to me than the rubies you can buy. Now, we had a plot over there back in 1905. We had the dedication of that Civil War monument by the Grand Army of the Republic ladies. I was supposed to be buried over there with my good friend here, my lovely wife. So, but guess what? They buried 2 Confederate officers over there. I wasn't going to be buried with no rebels. So we bought a new plot on this side of the road. We're over here, and we're resting in peace under these lovely trees. Well, after the war, I went back. I went back to Indiana, Pennsylvania, became a carpenter, and the people started calling me Colonel, including this lovely lady. And they called me Colonel, and they said, you want to be a congressman? You want to be the mayor? What do you want to be? They elected me sheriff at age 30. I was sheriff of Indiana County for 3 years until what year was that? That must have been about 1872. And then I went back to being a carpenter, and I was a pretty good carpenter. But I was getting old. I was getting near 40, and I looked down the road, and here was this old maid down the road. She was 27 years old. Her name was Catherine Dalby, and nobody would have her. But I took her. I took her. And in 3 years' time, we had one son. His name was Ross. That was in 1882. And Horace Greeley was running around, and he was telling people, hey, go west, old people. So we went west. We got on a train. Remember that? We got on that train in Pittsburgh. We went all the way to Denver. And then we got on another train called the Colorado and Southern and came up here to Fort Collins. Brand new depot down there at LaPorte and Mason Street. A brand new one. Well, we spent 3 days looking for a fort. We couldn't find it. But I decided I needed to sell real estate. So we bought a little house over on Remington Street, and nobody was buying real estate. There was 1,612 people here. Nobody needed any more houses. So I opened a little grocery store on West Mountain Avenue, 214 West Mountain. And that place today is, meanwhile, back at the ranch, some sort of selling place they got there. And right next door was a livery stable.
Beer.
And there were a lot of horses, and now that's Cooper Smith's.
Beer.
It's a beer place, good. But my building did pretty good. I sold a lot of groceries. So by 1900, I was able to build a second story right there today. And you can see it on the top. It says Howard Block. That's me. Well, we did pretty good selling all this stuff, and we had that house. And do you know that not only did we have a new waterworks system, but by 1887, we had electricity. Wow. It was really something. And by 1893, you could get on a telephone and call all the way to Denver. Whoa.
We had one.
Yeah, well, it didn't work very well. I think you broke the handle. Anyway, things were getting better, and in 1898, they built a sugar factory, and the people started coming in. And by that time, the population had gone almost to 6,000 people. So I was selling groceries like crazy, and they took away that old horse thing that was in the center of College Road and Mountain Avenue, where horses used to drink out of. They took that sand away, and horseless carriages were all over the place. And we did pretty good, didn't we? But by 1900, she was an invalid. she was in a wheelchair. So we sold that house and I bought and built a new house down way south on College Road, almost to Laurel. Now this was on the east side of the street heading west. We could sit on the porch. Remember that? We used to watch these kids go into a place called Old Main, going to school, Colorado Agriculture College. Well, we built this house with one story because she couldn't get around and she was in a wheelchair. Well, today that house is gone and there's someplace in there. It's at 638, I think it's 638 South College. It's waxing studio, Screaming Peach Waxing Studio. I hope to goodness it's haunted in there because we died in there and those waxers should get haunted. That's all I can think. By 1907, we had a streetcar trolley went right in front of our house. And by 1909, I was tired. I was 70 years old and you needed help. I paid full attention to her. So I retired. And by 1919, at age 80 and a half, I finally died. And I was here. And they put me here, not over there. They put me here. And my darling wife, Kate, died a year and 3 days later. And my son and his wife took care of her, or we had some help by that time. And so we're really proud to be in Fort Collins, even though there's no fort. And we're really proud to be in this beautiful spot. And I thank you kindly for coming to the cemetery.
My name is James Benham Fletcher, and I stand before you in the trappings of my trade. For when I lived here in Fort Collins, I was a butcher. Had a fine shop on Mountain Avenue, but before I was a butcher, I was a farmer. I was born to it, you see. Followed my father's trade, for he was a farmer in Missouri. Established a fine cotton farm where he raised truck vegetables as well as children. You see, my father's first wife bore him 5 daughters, 4 of whom survived to adulthood. He married again. My mother bore him 9 daughters, right in a row. He must have been trying for the boy because I was his last child, born in 1840. So I was raised in comfortable circumstances on a large farm powered by the labor of black slaves and raised in a house full of females. Well, during my young youth and into my teen years, my sisters married. Many of them moved away. For example, my half-sister Sarah married James Hoggett, and they in 1844 moved to Texas, where many Missourians went because land was cheap. They settled there, were very successful in this area south of Dallas after having built one of the first houses in what eventually became the city of Dallas. I mention Sarah because she figures prominently and unhappily later on in my tale. Well, when I reached my 20th year in 1860, I had good expectations of taking over my father's property, for he had fallen ill and perished in February of that year. But when I took up the task of probating his will, I learned that while I would eventually inherit the land, it would be in my mother's name and be handled largely by her 2 sons by a previous husband. I was granted directly 5 horses, 5 shares of stock in a dubious farmer's bank in Missouri, and all of my father's books, and that was it. The portion of his estate which was to be auctioned off was to be divided into 13 parts and distributed to my sisters and half-sisters, all of whom were married and well established in life. I was a young man with nothing. Now, apparently, my father was one of those men who felt that a young man should make his own way in the world. I felt put out by that. My sister Sarah in Texas called upon me as probator of the will to represent her interests at the auction in Missouri, which I did. I brought with me to Texas her share of the cash, along with sundry other property, which I brought to her house, but I did not enter. In that evening, I left there on the porch a black slave named Jim, a pair of shoes, 2 pairs of hose, 2 bolts of cloth, 12 pounds of coffee, 100 pounds of flour, and I proceeded to mount my horse and ride off to Palestine, Texas, with the balance of the cash. Now, you may think that wicked of me, but I had nothing else to establish myself. Well, I did well enough in Texas for another year until the war between the states broke out. I was obliged to join the Confederate cause, and I did well enough in that, eventually rising to the rank of captain. But you know, those men who see the worst in a war are usually those who say the least, and so with your permission, I will say nothing at all. During the course of war, however, I had garrison duty in San Antonio, and I was able to take me a wife who bore me the first of our 4 children. Violet was born in July of 1864, right in the middle of the war. When Violet was born, my wife and I came to the conclusion that if any daughter of ours was to maintain her identity after her marriage, it was important that she have no middle name so that she would be able to retain the name of her father and some measure of her identity rather than be subsumed in that of her husband, and that is what we did. Later on, when she married a Dr. Clark here in Fort Collins, she let people know that her name was Violet Fletcher Clark. Well, Texas was a hard place after the war. The carpetbaggers descended and we left. In 1870, I moved here to Buckhorn Canyon, come up with a load of supplies and a wagon drawn by oxen, set up a good farm, called on my wife and 4 children to join me, and we spent 6 years in the canyon. Unfortunately, my only boy, Willis Fletcher, died out there on the Buckhorn, so he could not move with us when we came into Fort Collins. We sold the ranch, 1880, moved into town principally because we wanted to make sure that my daughters had a good education. Violet was among the first children to be registered at the Remington School. The ranch had brought a good profit. We bought a house on the corner of College Avenue and Oak Streets. It had a 100-foot frontage, solid brick frame house. Is there no longer, but there was a slough to the north side of the house, and when it froze over in the winter, the children had the opportunity to go ice skating. All seemed well, but of course I needed a new profession, which is why I took up the trade of butchering. My first shop was the Stone Meat Market on Mountain Avenue. Shortly after, I joined forces with a local attorney and we bought a larger shop further down the street. I was planning on relocating to still a larger facility when I fell ill with an abscess and due to blood poisoning took my life in 1882. My wife survived me by 57 years. 57 years a widow. I cannot honestly say if it was due to her continuing devotion to me or a conviction that after being married to me, marriage was not her cup of tea. Perhaps someday she will come here and tell her own tale. That is mine. If you would judge me, I pray that you be gentle. And with that, I thank you for your attendance, and I bid you fair time of day.
Good day, my lads and lasses. Welcome to Grandview Cemetery.
Morning.
My name's Tom. I was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1844. My beautiful wife Frances, who lie here beside me, she was born in Ireland, in Dublin as well, in 1856. 12 years my minor. Not too shabby, huh, lad? Not too shabby at all. Frances and I chose to spend our home and our lives in the Pleasant Valley here in the foothills, in the Spring Canyon area in Stout, Colorado. Our home was in Stout, Colorado, the Getty Ranch, which is now covered by the Horsetooth Reservoir. If you don't know, Horsetooth Reservoir now covers most of the town of Stout. The Getty Ranch is now covered with water. You must forgive me if my accent fades in and out. I've been buried here in Grandview Cemetery for 84 years, next to Germans and Englishmen and Scottish. It goes back and forth, I can hardly control it. It's incredible. What hasn't faded over the years is my drinking, my fighting, and my baby making. They're as Irish as ever. As I said, 14 children, sir. Not too shabby. In 1881, the third of my 14 were buried were born in Stout, Colorado. Born in Stout, the third through the 14th were all here. The first two were born in Missouri. We left Missouri. We couldn't stand Missouri. Too many Southerners. We had to come here. I heard someone mention the climate. That's right. Spring Canyon, the hills in the fall and the spring, they remind us of Ireland. That's why we chose Pleasant Valley. Beautiful green rolling hills. As you walk through the cemetery today, you may have passed the Union Soldier statue. The Union Soldier statue meant a lot to us. The GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, dedicated that statue. May 30th, 1905, I was there. I was there. Howard was there. Lindenmeier was there. Mandeville, he was there too. We were all there as members of the Grand Army of the Republic. The GAR meant a lot to us, and it still does today. Mandeville was our adjutant. He was our leader. He said, let's invite those Confederate rebels, Ish and Fletcher as well. We said, you're welcome. Please come to the ceremony as long as you stand in the back. Let me tell you my involvement in the Civil War. In 1861, I was in New York City. New York City as an Irish immigrant. In 1861, I was a second-class citizen. I knew what it felt like to be a second-class citizen. And that's why I chose to fight in this war, to help all of America, to help us all unite. I enlisted in the 82nd New York Infantry. The 82nd New York Infantry, we fought several battles throughout the East, but none as deadly, none as brutal as those 3 days at Gettysburg. Howard was there as well. He was wounded severely. I too was wounded severely at Gettysburg. But let's face it, if I was truly wounded severely at Gettysburg, I probably would have died at Gettysburg. And as a good Irishman does, generations down the line, it sounds like a good story to tell. Let me tell you about my involvement up in Stout, Colorado. The Getty Ranch, prosperous ranch. On the back of the newspaper, the Fort Collins Courier, in the 1890s, you see an advertisement to buy eggs from the Getty Ranch. A dozen eggs for a nickel. A dozen eggs for a nickel, could you imagine that? Incredible. Another major thing for Thomas Getty, I was laying the foundation for the Stout post office. The post office in 1899 laid the foundation, which I later became postmaster. I was the postmaster in Stout for several years, and Frances and I also together ran the boarding house. She and I ran the boarding house for the Stout stone quarry workers. A very important job to house those boys and feed those Swedes that worked up there and helped build Fort Collins. Stout stones used everywhere. The old Flowers house out in Bellevue, all the buildings downtown, many of the buildings downtown and the churches. As far as Lincoln, Nebraska, in the state capitol building, stout stone was used. It's incredible. Pardon my distraction. I couldn't help when I got up this morning. I noticed there was golf over there. I see some golf, and I see through the trees, is that cricket? What a slow sport. I don't know if you knew this, but Prospect Park used to be right around the corner. Prospect Park, the horse track, used to be right here along Mountain Avenue. In 1906, my son Benjamin Butler, my beautiful wife Frances, and I went to watch Joseph, my son, up on a mount that day. He ran a race in 1906 in front of thousands of people and won that race. Spectacular. In front of 4,000 people. You can't tell me you get 4,000 people to come watch you play golf. There's no chance. Too slow.
John Ish, formerly of the Confederate Army. And I understand that you're wanting to learn a little bit about the history of the people who founded this area. So I believe I played no small part in that, so I will tell you about myself. I believe I will start, well, in the beginning. I was born in 1839 in Saline County, Missouri. I was born into some privilege. My father was a well-respected judge, and we were prominent slaveholders and farmers in the area. This allowed me to attain my education, and I graduated from Jewell College. Shortly after that graduation, I joined the Confederate Army in the war against the Northern aggression. I was very eager to join, but I can tell you my eagerness was quickly replaced by despair and sadness, the misery of war. I myself was wounded 7 times throughout my career. Most seriously, I was wounded in the Battle of Pea Ridge in northern Arkansas when I was shot through the groin. I laid on that battlefield for 2 days with 3,500 dead and dying. But the good Lord saw to it that I survived, and I spent the next 6 months hanging by the thinnest of threads between life and death, but I pulled through, continued my fight, until I was captured by the northern aggressors and taken to the prison camp in Alton, Illinois, on the outskirts of Chicago. I will tell you that it was a horrible, horrible place, and many perished through starvation and disease. Altogether, 12,000 of us were held there, and 1,500, more than 10%, passed. But the good Lord watched out for me, and I survived. In 1865, I was released, and I left the Confederate Army at the rank of captain, as you can plainly see by my shoulder boards. Having lost everything, Confederate money now being worthless and my slaves and my other property taken away from me, I moved to Texas, where I became a drover, entered the cattle business, and made my living driving cattle from Texas up north, where the cattle could be sold for more money. During this time, I blazed a trail from southern Texas to Independence, Kansas, and I'm proud to say they still call it the Ish Trail today. I saved enough coin and bought some cattle over a couple of years of working, and felt I was in a position where I could get married, and so I married my second cousin, Kitty. Kitty blessed me with my only son, Ewell, before she perished after only 2 years of marriage. Heartbroken, I decided to move west. So I got 5 friends, and we sold our cattle and picked out the finest. I saved 150 of my finest heifers, and we moved west. And I can tell you again, the good Lord was looking out for me, because the wagon train in front of us was savaged by the Indians. Many perished. The same with the wagon train behind us. Now, there were only 6 of us. They could have easily overrun us. But after only 90 days of travel, we made it across the plains to this Buckhorn region, Colorado, completely unmolested by the Indians. And once arriving here, I started my cattle business, and after 2 years, I married Mary Bates, who blessed me with 2 daughters, Virginia and Elizabeth. Like I said, I believe idle hands are the devil's work, so I worked hard to establish the cattle industry in this area, employed many a fine man, and built my herd and kind of contributed to the economic development of the area. But I believe, like I said, the Lord had been watching out for me, and it was time to spread His word. So I helped establish the Christian church in the area. I was one of the founders, one of the elders, and first trustees. And I believe this moral guidance is really what allowed this area to prosper, not like the lawless ruthlessness of the northern neighbors in Cheyenne. Nothing but savages. But I know that you can't just live by the word, by God's word. You have to have laws, you have to have order. So I was very active in the Democratic Party. And although I never aspired to hold an office myself, I can say I played no small part in getting fine men elected into key positions that helped mold and shape this area so that the cattlemen could prosper and survive and the business could grow. And I have overheard throughout the years that the cattle industry is still Colorado's #1 industry. I don't know how you accomplish it, but I hear you export beef products all over the world. That is beyond my intellect, but I'm proud to say that I had a part in forming that. And I continued this work in politics and in the cattle industry until 1910. In 1910, at the age of 72, I decided I might as well retire, spend time with my beautiful Mary. So I sold off my cattle, provided for my family, and retired. But only 2 years later, 1912, I succumbed to an illness and passed, left this earth. And I would say that's where my story ends, but I've been napping here off and on for the past 102 years, and occasionally I'll come up and look at what's become of my beautiful Buckhorn area and what's become of my Colorado, and occasionally have conversations with fine folks like you that come to visit me.
During the Civil War, the fifers and drummers gave the battle commands in battle, you know, charge, retreat, whatever. They were also, just during daily activity, they were also gave the camp duty signals, you know, like breakfast call, lunch, the dinner calls, and the various commands for the different activities during the day, all kinds of things. They also had social function for dances. They provided the music, and for marching, they played the marching. You know, when they were marching from one place to the other, they played for that too. So they were quite busy. Fifes are very loud. The sound carries, and that's why it was used not only in battle but camp duty. You know, they didn't have, you know, PA systems and things. That was their PA system, I guess. But yeah, the sound carried a long distance, and it's quite loud.
Well, hello, I'm Kurt Knierim, and I teach history and government at Rocky Mountain High School in Fort Collins, Colorado. And today we're at the cemetery stroll, and I've brought several of my students along with me. They're part of a club called the Lobo Mess, Lobo being the mascot of the Rocky Mountain Lobos, and a mess being an informal group of soldiers that would eat together and tent together and that sort of thing. This club has been going on at Rocky Mountain High School since 2001. And we have about 20 students involved any given year, and what we do is we'll generally go to elementary schools or middle schools or civic organizations or national park sites and give presentations. Each of the students does a presentation, they do some research, and then has about a 15-minute presentation that they give on some aspect of the Civil War.
I'm Sean Papil. I'm part of the Lobo Mess group at Rocky Mountain High School, and I'm the photographer for the group. I use a daguerreotype Civil War era camera, which is focused by using this glass plate back here, and adjusting the focus with this knob on the lens and moving it back and forth like this. And after that is done, to take a picture with this camera, you have this light-proof box. This is the shutter box, which is put on the camera. And then you lift this up to take the photo. This is the shutter. After that, you take this device back to your darkroom and you develop the plates, which are held in this device. This is a 4x5 plate holder. And you develop your plates, and we can print on any material we want. In order to print on glass, we print a regular glass plate, which transfers a negative image, and then we put a black cloth on the back of that glass to bring out a positive image. And with tin types or metal, we print on a black piece of metal that we spray paint black and then develop it the same way as actual photo paper.